for the groom's mom to break a white ceramic bell that's filled with grains and flour. That's supposed to bring prosperity to the couple. So as soon as like they see them, evidently the groom's mom just starts breaking stuff. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week we are talking about marriage, the whole idea of marriage, the institution of marriage. Should be a good one. I definitely there's this one that there's so much to this that I even say in there I may end up doing a part 2 from just a whole different perspective of marriage, because most of this comes from the Western, or at least it leads up and evolves into the Western idea of marriage. But I would love to go back and delve into the Eastern side and all the other different sides and facets of marriage. We'll see there's so much to it, and every culture does it so differently. But yeah, little housekeeping before we get going. What am I watching? I just watched that movie, The Creep, on Netflix. It's a very odd movie, but it's good. It's definitely good. It stars Mark Duplass. He stars as a guy who needs a videographer to film him doing some stuff. But as soon as the guy shows up, the weird stuff just starts. And if you like weird, maybe scary, maybe psycho movie plots, and this one's probably for you. The ending definitely left my mouth just dropped, just open. So it's good all the way up to the end. If you're enjoying it, you're wondering, will the end pay off? Yes, it does. There's also, you believe it, there's a sequel, which I haven't actually quite seen, but I saw a little bit of it. And I was talking with somebody the other day, and I believe we both agreed it's not as good as the first one, but I haven't finished it, so I can't say for sure. But there is a second one. It's also on Netflix. Give it a check out. Give it a look. Another thing that I'm watching is God's Favorite Idiot. It's also on Netflix. It's a pretty good show. And I don't watch many TV shows on streamers. There's just so many of them out there, and most of them are not that good. But it's mostly because you can get like 3 or 4 episodes into these things, and you're like, oh, this was a waste of my time, right? But this is definitely not one. It starts off a little choppy. Has to find a stride. A couple episodes in, but it definitely does. And it's about a guy who gets struck by lightning, and then becomes called by God. So basically, God strikes him with lightning, and kind of the thing is like, what do you do with that afterwards? How do you live your life? He meets angels. He tries to help people. It's a whole thing, but it's actually pretty funny. It's got Melissa McCarthy and her husband. They're the main characters of it. I'll leave it right there if you want to check that out. What am I listening to? I'm listening to My Mama Told Me with Langston Kerman. He is a comedian. He's a very funny comedian. But this pod explores like the idea of like legends and stories that were told, like not like folk tales, like just stuff that just is not real. I think, or is grounded in some form of reality. One of the ones they just recently did, or one of the ones I just listened to, was about like, are there like reptiles and alligators in the sewer system? Is that real? Is that not? Stuff like that. They do all different kind of different things like that, and very like, I would definitely give it a listen. It is funny, and you may end up learning something along the line as well. But as I always say, if I can plug those podcasts, I can plug my own mini-sode as well. Every Thursday at 4:30 a.m., you can find Bite-Sized Bios, BSB. We profile somebody in history that I don't think gets talked about that much. The last episode was about Ric Flair, and we learned a lot about him. I didn't know anything about him, and like I kept saying in the episode, the biggest thing for me was like, why do I know this dude and I don't watch wrestling? So how is he so magnetic and so, just people just want, like, I don't know. People seem to know about him, and I wanted to know why. We find out a few interesting things. Find out that his adoption may or may not, have been on the up and up, and that it was actually part of a larger adoption crime ring that was happening in Tennessee in the 50s. Or, yeah, I think he was born in 49. I don't want to get it wrong. I definitely say the right date in the show, but definitely check it out. We've covered people like Nelson Mandela, Morgan Freeman, Jackie O, Benjamin Franklin. Who else did we do? We did Ellen. We've done Michelle Obama. We've done a bunch, and there's definitely more to come. So if you guys like hearing about biographies of people, which I love to do, head over to htthappen.com where you'll find all the transcripts for that, as well as the other episodes. You'll find the works site for anything that's anything that I find, I put on that works site because I want you guys to be able to see what I see and see where I'm finding this stuff at. But as always, if you like what you hear here, give us a like and subscribe wherever you find this. Give us 5 stars if you feel so inclined. If you want to give us 2 stars and say why you didn't want to give us 5 stars, that is fine too. Constructive criticism is always welcome. But I don't think there's much else to say. So without further ado, as we're going to do here, let's get to the episode. All right. So today we are going to talk about marriage, the institution of marriage, what binds 2 people or sometimes more together. So the word marriage is derived from the Middle English marriage, right? I don't know why I say it like that, but it first appears around 1250 or 1300 CE. It comes from also the Old French marier, which is to marry, and ultimately the Latin term maritar. I'm sure I'm not getting any of these pronounced correctly, but that's basically where the evolution of the word marriage comes from. And the Latin word means to provide a wife for a husband or a husband for a wife, meaning to actually get married. And so most ancient societies needed a secure environment for the perpetuation of their species and to have a system of rules to handle the granting of property rights and the protection of bloodlines. Marriage is what initially, kind of filled that need. It kind of gave some order to things to say, who's married to who and who's related to who based off, the marriage. The best available evidence, the earliest available evidence that shows any type of actual marriage is about 4,300 years old, maybe 4,000 years old or so. For thousands of years before that, they believed that there was still marriage happening. It just wasn't. It was much more. It wasn't as rigid as we'll see it come to be in the coming years. It was more like a group of loosely kind of organized people, like a 30-person kind of group, and maybe some people are together, maybe some people are not. Maybe one guy shares multiple women. Maybe one woman is with a multitude of guys. That's kind of what it was before we see it kind of become into the man and woman sort of union, or even the polygamy style union. As hunter-gatherers settled down into these agrarian civilizations, they needed more stable arrangements, kind of like what we're saying. They had to go from the group of, I don't know who's with who, to now, okay, when we're a little bit more stable, I need to know that that's my woman right there. That's my husband either way. And the first real evidence of marriage ceremonies, and we'll see this a lot, what we've seen this throughout the time during the podcast, a lot of early things for humanity happened in Mesopotamia. And so the first place where they really see real marriage ceremonies dates back to about 2,300 BC in Mesopotamia. And we'll see over the next few hundred to several hundred years, it expands from there to the ancient Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans, and this is where they kind of put their spin on things to make marriage their own. Marriage was the primary purpose to bind women to men, and thus guarantee that a man's children were truly his biological heirs. Like I said, we come from that initial 30-person group of like maybe some people are with each other, maybe they're not. Now you can more guarantee who is your son to carry on your name and property rights and all things like that. And it was believed early during these times that when a woman became married to a woman, it was believed during these times that when a woman became married to a man, he became her property, and was used therefore to produce offspring. And in the betrothal ceremony of ancient Greece, when a father would hand over his daughter to the husband, he would say, quote, "I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring," end quote. So that was a big part of it during the early times. And among the ancient Hebrews, men were free to take several wives. But in the Greek, as well as the Romans, they stayed much more monogamous, but there was like this whole like look the other way thing with like concubines and prostitutes and even teenage male lovers. But the woman was at home the entire time. So 2 different ways to kind of handle the needs of these ancient men. I'm not sure how quite to describe that. But if wives failed to produce offspring, their husbands could just give them back and marry somebody else, because like I said, that was a large part of that time. You're here, you know why you're here for a reason, that's to give this man children. Their words, not mine. But if you didn't do it, they could just like bring you back at the customer service desk at Walmart. So as the Roman Catholic Church becomes more powerful throughout Europe, we see that the blessings of a priest becomes a more necessary step for marriage to be considered to be actually legal and to be recognized within the church. And by the 8th century, marriage was widely accepted in the Catholic Church as a sacrament or a ceremony to bestow God's grace. And so there are a lot of actual pieces that we'll talk about that make marriage into the modern entity that it is right now. It didn't start out to be, or it didn't start out as what we know it to be now. It had to go through some different things to become the marriage product that we have before us today. So one of the more important things that we'll see is the idea of consent, which, as we know, is not something that's always given for a number of things throughout history. But so the idea of consent for marriage, meaning that both parties actually agree to it, because we know, we also know the idea of arranged marriages, and there's people who get married, for certain reasons, whether it be whether it be about wars, providing peace in war, or just combining property rights for certain areas. I mean, there's a number of reasons to get married, but for a long time, it wasn't always between two consenting parties. It was maybe between one consenting party, and maybe the father of the bride thought that this would be good for their family, so he gave his daughter over, and she wasn't really into it. So we see around the 11th century, the idea of consent in marriage kind of arises. And it really comes from this guy, he was a Benedictine monk named Gratian. And he was kind of the first guy to be like, hey, people should probably be both on board with this before they just jump into it. And he did this in his textbook called Decretum Gratiani. He kind of named it after himself. This was in 1140, so he was the first guy to be like, are both of y'all cool with this? Both before we say I do and all that. And we'll even get to the idea of I do and all the different traditions that go along with modern Western marriage. But in his book, he required that couples both give their verbal consent and consummate their marriage to form a marital bond. And so no longer was it just the fact that she was there. You know what I mean? That the bride being at the wedding would be good enough. Used to be good enough. It's like, well, she's here. Who cares if she's happy? She's here. You know what I mean? We'll just marry her off. Now it had to be her actually saying, I want to be here. I choose to go into this willingly. And that will actually bring us to the idea of love in marriage, which it would seem like, a foregone conclusion, it would seem like from the very beginning, that's what I mean about saying the different things that make marriage what it is now. Before, really about 1,000 years ago, the idea of a love was not a large part of marriage. It was just something that happened. You guys get together, you need to have kids. Like I said, we need to keep this property in this part of the town, or with this family, or whatever, anything. So we get married. We want to quell the issues that are happening abroad. So we'll have these two people who represent these two different, sovereign nations get married. It's not because they love each other. It's because it's a means to an end. But we'll see the idea of love and marriage really comes from these guys. And I'd never really heard of them before. They're called the troubadours. I've heard of the term troubadour, but I didn't really know what it was. And so what the real troubadours, they were composers and poets that wrote in the Occitan language during the 12th and 13th centuries. And they were guys. They would go around and they would just sing about love, and they were nobility. And their main audience was the court, the royal court. And they would really kind of go on to establish the ideas of not being in love, because I think love has already been around, but the idea of love being a facet of marriage itself. And they use this to define what they call the courtly values. And from here, we'll get to the vows, the actual marriage vows. And this is what I meant earlier when I said we'll get to the idea of why we even say I do. And I don't think I have that specifically. I have to look into it. But what we do have here is that basically the vows that get recited today date back to about 500 years ago, and were created by a man named Thomas Cranmer. And he is considered to be the architect of English Protestantism, right? And so he laid out all of the modern wedding vows in a book called the Book of Common Prayer. And in that book, it's been revised multiple times, but in that book you find the actual foundations of what the current modern day vows are. Things like to have and to hold, right, from this day forward, for rich or for poor. All that comes from his book, the Book of Common Prayer, initially published in 1552. And of course, if we're going to talk about marriage, we must talk about divorce. And divorce, and most of this, all I would say all of this, for the most part, is just from a Western perspective. I didn't get the Eastern side of marriage too much. There is and the things I didn't know before, we're going to go through some different marriage traditions from around the world. But as far as what I'm saying right now, for most of these historic points, it's all based in Western history. But so in 1670, Parliament passed an act that allowed John Manners and Lord Roos to divorce, John John Manners, who was Lord Roos, to divorce his wife, Lady Anne Pierpont. And this really kind of created the first precedent for actual divorce, but it wouldn't become divorce as we know it, because for the next few hundred years, basically, if anybody wanted to get divorced, it was like had to be done by an act of Congress. So it wasn't as simple as just going to court and saying, "No, I want to be divorced." But it did create the precedent for somebody saying, "I don't want to be with this woman anymore," or I don't want to be with this man. And up until then, I don't really know how they handled divorce. To be truthfully honest with you, I don't think it really happened all that much. As far as when you talk about making it official to now talking about the idea of divorce, I think within then people were just staying in these marriages because it, like we said before, it wasn't all about love anyways. It was more of a business transaction. We'll see in 1858, it first does become. It's the first time that people can actually get divorced through a legal process and not like something they have to submit through to Parliament, which is a big thing. When I first read that out, what I said earlier was that they had to, if you're going to get divorced, you had to go to Congress. That's crazy. Imagine right now if you didn't want to be with the person that you're with, you wanted to get divorced, you had to drive or fly to Washington D.C. You know what I mean, and like basically petition your senator. It should say, that's just a lot. But we finally see in 1858, it becomes a legal process. And what we see as well is in about 100 years after that, is the first time that, because you had to have really good reasons before this in order to do it. But with the Divorce Reform Act of 1969, it's where you can really start to see people can just say, well, our marriage just kind of fell apart. And so you really do see an evolution of they're not even being a part of marriage 1,000 years ago to now the lack of love in marriage is a reason to not want to be married anymore. It's a very interesting timeline when you think about it. Just the fact that because I would have always thought that love would be a part of marriage, but you see from history that it's not. And now we're even to a point where, like I said, now we can say this is the reason why I don't want to be married anymore, because there is no love in this marriage. It comes full circle. The next bit of wedding tradition we're going to talk about is the engagement ring. And so it is a universal marriage tradition across a lot of the globe. The custom actually dates back to the ancient Romans and Egyptians. Go figure. And what I didn't know, and I believe we've covered before, is how actually close those two cultures worked together. Because not together like in conjunction, but like they were around some of the same times. And the Romans actually even settled the Egyptians right before they would end up, I think, the fall of the Roman Empire. But I mean, I growing up was always thought that they were just completely different and separate entities, but they were not. For a bit of time, they were actually one thing. So it's not surprising that the idea comes from both of them at the same time. But it is believed that the roundness of the ring represents eternity, and so thus wearing the wedding ring symbolizes a union that is supposed to last forever. And even back during that time, this is why one of the reasons that it goes on the finger, the ring finger, is because there was thought that there was a vein in the ring finger that ran directly to the heart. So that is like that's why we have a ring finger. That's why we wear our ring on our ring finger, is because about 1,000 to 1,500 years ago, before modern medicine, people thought that there was a vein in your finger that ran directly to your heart. And so it's like from this, unified ceremony we're having where we put a ring on our fingers on this finger that goes directly to your heart. It's like almost too much to stand. All right, and now I will tell you about different types of marriage that came after the initial marriage. And we have things called common law marriage, and that's an informal marriage, a legal network that makes people married due to living together for a period of time. They're not always legal. Depends on it has to be legal in whatever locality you live in, but it is a thing. To just be with somebody long enough that you end up being married to them. There's exogamy, which is when you marry outside of a specific clan or tribe. Of course, we have monogamy, which is just marrying one person. Then you have polygamy, which is the practice of having more than one spouse at the same time. And then there's polyandry, which is women who have more than one husband. I've never even heard of that before. So polyandry is women who are married to more than one guy. And then there's also same-sex marriage, just a gay marriage. But yeah, I think that's really all I have for like the actual marriage middle meat of this. Always interested. This is. I wasn't sure how to put all this stuff together and make it an episode, but I knew I had some good information, and so I was hoping to share this with you guys. And that is how marriage happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The first evidence of marriage comes from Mesopotamia about 2,500 years ago. Love didn't come into marriage until the 1100s. The original words for the marriage ceremonies come from the Book of Common Prayer that was written in 1552. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so what we're going to do for the things I didn't know before segment is I actually found this website that just tells you a bunch of different wedding traditions from all around the world, and I thought I was going to try to list these off and put them in the actual regular meat part of the episode, but I thought this would probably be better served spot to do it. So we'll just hop right in with in Mexico they wear a lasso made of rosary beads and flowers that is draped around the shoulders in kind of a figure eight symbol, like when the couple gets together when they're doing their vows, and that's to represent the infinity symbol, which of course means like forever. And yeah, just like the whole union of the couple, I thought that was pretty interesting. You don't really see that very often. In Armenia, they balance lavash flatbread on their shoulders, and that's what you do when you're getting married in Armenia. According to the customs, when the bride and groom enter the wedding reception, typically the groom's house, they break a plate for good luck, and then are given the bread and honey by the groom's mother. They balance the bread on their shoulders to ward off evil spirits, eat spoons full of honey to symbolize happiness. Wow. Yeah, I thought another one that I thought was interesting was in the Congo, when on their wedding day, the bride and groom, they can't smile. They can't smile at all. They have to keep a straight face, because if they don't, then it seems that they're not taking the wedding seriously. They're not taking their marriage seriously. So in other cultures where it's a very happy, and everyone else is probably happy and smiling, but you can't smile. I'd never heard of that before. In Fiji, when a man asks a woman's father for her hand in marriage, he presents him with a whale's tooth. You're gonna get a whale tooth. So in Guatemala, they break stuff. It's very custom for the groom's mom to break a white ceramic bell that's filled with grains and flour that's supposed to bring prosperity to the couple. So as soon as they see them, evidently the groom's mom just starts breaking stuff. Okay, so in Japan, women wear all white, which is just like a lot of Western ceremonies, but their outfit's called a tsuno kakushi, right? And it's got a hood on it. It's a kimono with a hood. She's wearing all white, and that's not the crazy part. The hood is supposed to hide the so-called horns of jealousy that she feels towards her mother-in-law. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot. So in Russia, they have something called a karave, which is a big piece of bread, right? And so the idea is whoever takes the biggest bite of the bread without using their hands is considered the head of the family. And I can only imagine how that must have went over to some people. If the guy's expecting to be the head of the family and your wife just takes this huge bite and everybody's just like, oh, see, where's the pants? That relationship. Okay, I've only got a couple more, and then we'll get out of here. But man, there's one or two that I want to share with you. So in Mongolia, before you can even start to try to get married, let's say you met the person you want to be with, and you're all about to set a date. Before you do that, you have to go kill a baby chicken and cut it apart, and do this while you're both holding the knife together, right? You have to try to find its liver, and then if you don't find it, then you got to get another chicken, kill that chicken too, and you keep doing it until you're successful. That's what happens if you get married in Mongolia. The last one I'll share with you, it happens in French Polynesia, on the Marquesas Islands of French Polynesia. Once you're done with the wedding, once it's all said and done, I do, love you, all that good stuff. The relatives of the bride lay side by side, face down on the ground, and the bride and groom walk over them like they're a rug. So people get down differently all over the world. All right, Thanks for tuning in to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. We learned a lot. About marriage. I think my favorite little tidbit was just from the in the Congo, where they said that you can't smile on your wedding day. I must imagine those pictures just must be hilarious. No offense to the tradition. I'm not trying to be sensitive to all that, but just the pictures you imagine of people, just everyone around them is just like, yeah, and the bride and groom are just like stone faced. You're like, what's going on? It's like, no, it's supposed to be that way because they're happy. Like, this is so they know how serious marriage is. But yeah, definitely good episode. As always, if you want more of that, head over to hdthappen.com. You will always find the transcripts and photos and videos and works cited for every episode that we do here. You can also go to hdthappen, at hdthappen, whether it be on Instagram or Twitter. You'll definitely find some other stuff up there. We haven't quite got the Instagram off the ground yet. It is there, but it's not too much to look at. But the Twitter is always bustling. And every Wednesday, for about the last month, we've been doing the no context history photo of the week. And so that's out there, and it's just like go into the internet and find a crazy picture from history and just like put it up there with like no explanation whatsoever. And it's kind of a fun way to just look, another way to look at history and to, continue to question things. But I believe that's about it. As always, like and subscribe wherever you find this podcast. Give us 5 stars if you want to, and 2 stars if you don't want to. And tell us why you didn't want to give us those 5 stars. That's great as well. I don't think I have much else to tell you guys. No, as always, thanks for pressing play. We'll see you in a couple days with the next bite-sized bio.